On November 29, 2016, ASIRT was directed to investigate the circumstances surrounding a Calgary Police Service officer-involved shooting that resulted in the death of a 27-year-old woman that day. Our investigation is complete. In the early hours of November 29, 2016, multiple people called police about a woman acting erratically outside apartment buildings in the area of 11th Avenue Southwest and 16th Street. At approximately 2:34 a.m., the first caller phoned the CPS non-emergency line and told police that a woman had been screaming for about 30 minutes and that it was possible that the woman might be on something. The caller advised that the woman seemed frantic, appeared to try to flag down vehicles, and seemed incoherent. The woman was running back and forth between the street and the sidewalk and appeared to be trying to get into different apartment buildings. CPS dispatched a marked patrol unit occupied by 2 uniformed officers. At approximately 2:37 a.m., a second caller reported a woman was running in and around the intersection at 11th Avenue and 16th Street, swinging knives and going crazy. The woman was observed repeatedly climbing onto a cement pillar housing a sidewalk or a crosswalk sign. She was described as yelling and making grunting noises, but not saying anything that could be understood. This caller had initially dialed the non-emergency line, but switched to 911 when it became clear that the woman was carrying and swinging 2 large knives, one in each hand. The caller feared the woman was going to kill somebody given the way she was acting. This additional information from the second caller could not be shared with the dispatched officers in the 2 minutes before they arrived on scene. An incident unfolding elsewhere at the same time had become the focus of communication on the officer's assigned channel, blocking the dispatcher's ability to pass on this update. At approximately 2:39 a.m., 2 officers arrived in a CPS marked police truck. They saw a woman run from the middle of the street to a parked car, hitting the car, before running southbound on 16th Street. She ran from between 2 parked vehicles to an apartment building's main entrance. At this point, the officers observed that the woman had 2 large knives, one in each hand. The officer in the passenger seat immediately got out of the vehicle, drew her service firearm, and loudly directed the woman to stop. At the apartment door, the woman could be heard screaming and panting. Surveillance video from the building recorded the woman raising her right hand above her head, holding the knife in a downward stabbing motion. She then stabbed at the door with an overhand motion, audibly striking the building. She held a second large knife in her left hand, and she screamed, possibly help, several times. Immediately thereafter, the woman turned, screaming, and ran towards the police vehicle in what was described as a sprint, out of view of the building's security camera. The officer standing outside the police vehicle yelled commands to drop the knife. After the first command, the woman yelled help, but did not drop the knives and continued moving towards the officers. The same thing happened after a second command to drop the knife. By this point, the first officer had backed up towards the rear of the police vehicle. When the woman reached the side of the police vehicle, still occupied by the second officer in the driver's seat, the woman tried to enter or leaned in to enter the passenger side, still armed. The officer in the driver's seat heard his partner issuing commands and looked over to see the armed woman turning into the vehicle. This officer described everything happening so quickly that he had no chance to protect himself and genuinely feared for both his and his partner's safety. The first officer was about to direct the woman to drop the knife for the 4th time when she saw the woman move towards the interior of the police vehicle and her partner, causing her to fire 2 shots from the service pistol. The officer could still be heard to yell, drop the knife," after the shots were fired. The woman fell to the ground just outside the police vehicle's passenger door. Both officers immediately began administering first aid until emergency medical services arrived to provide critical medical care. Sadly, the woman's injuries were too significant and she subsequently died. Upon autopsy, it was confirmed that the woman died as a result of the 2 gunshot wounds. Toxicology confirmed the presence of significant concentrations of methadone and cocaine. The incident unfolded very quickly. From the point that the woman stabbed the apartment door to the time of the shooting, only 8 seconds had elapsed. The entire length of the incident, from the time that the first officer exited the vehicle to the time the second shot was fired, was approximately 17 seconds. Under the criminal code, a police officer is authorized to use as much force as is reasonably necessary to perform his or her lawful duties. This can include force intended or likely to cause death or grievous bodily harm if the officer believes reasonably that such force is necessary to defend themselves or someone under their protection from imminent death or grievous bodily harm. Furthermore, any person, including a police officer, is entitled to use reasonable force in self-defense or in the defense of another person. Any assessment of the reasonableness of the force used will consider different factors, including the use or threatened use of a weapon, the imminence of the threat, other options available, and the nature of the force or threat of force itself. The woman's actions upon police arrival were capable of giving rise to a reasonable fear of death or grievous bodily harm to either officer. Indeed, before police arrived, an independent witness had concerns that this woman was going to kill someone. The woman's erratic and irrational behavior, combined with the fact that she was armed and did not comply with repeated verbal commands from the uniformed police officer, created significant danger for both the officers and any other member of the public that might have been in the area. As she ran at the officers and the marked police vehicle and came into extremely close proximity to the officer seated in the driver's seat, the imminence of the threat she presented increased. It's very clear the woman was in some form of crisis, and it is impossible to know what might have been going on in her mind. The tragedy remains, however, that in this state, she was dangerous and unpredictable. Given her state, the speed with which the situation deteriorated, her apparent irrationality, her close proximity, and her failure to respond to simple, clear commands while armed with weapons capable of lethal injury, the officer had no other reasonable options to address the immediate threat. The officers were lawfully placed and had both the grounds and the lawful authority to take the woman into custody. Equally, if not more importantly, the officers had a duty to intervene because the woman in these circumstances presented a significant risk to both the lives and safety of anyone she might encounter and herself. The woman's actions upon police arrival placed the officers in an untenable situation capable of giving rise to a reasonable fear of death or grievous bodily harm. With all the factors and all the relevant law considered, the force used by the officer can be viewed as objectively reasonable in the circumstances. There are no reasonable grounds, therefore, to believe that an offense was committed by any of the involved officers, and no charges will be laid.